Hi, I'm Ztarli, and in this video I'll be showing you how I use Artflow to create feather and fur. Now the first thing I'll be doing, and this is the same with my scale tutorial, is I'll be sketching out the design of the creature first. I'll also be adding colour to it, so I'll be fully colouring it with its flats, as well as adding some shadow and highlight and blending those colours in as a base. So I'll be starting with a base colour first, and then I'll be adding my feathers and fur to this base. Now, I originally drew this picture for the scales reference with a rough scales along the top and neck of the dragon, but I will actually be blurring these in for the feather and fur tutorial, and you'll see me do that in a moment as well. Now, while I create feather and fur, I do use the smudge tool a lot, and I use the felt brush when I'm doing this, as I do find that it pulls the colours or it smudges quite well, where I find some of the other brushes aren't as strong or don't have the right pull when smudging. So yes, the felt brush is the brush I use for most of the smudging in this video. Now when I do feathers, and we're going to start with feathers, I do a semi-realistic. Sometimes I do use reference when creating feathers, but I have a particular style with painting feathers which I find really enjoyable and I really like. And that's to have a lighter underneath the feathers. So in my mind, the feathers are lighter underneath because the downy feathers at the base of a feather are usually a lighter colour, and then they get darker as they go to the tip. So I do this zigzaggy sort of pattern, which you can see me doing here, where I have light that then goes into dark, with the light actually being underneath the feathers layering over top. So I'll start with light, and then I'll paint the feathers over top of the light, with the ends hovering over top of the light underneath feathers, if that makes sense. So here you can see I've got light creamy color, and then I'm painting the green down over top of it, and then I will use the smudge tool to blend those two colors back in together, and I just keep layering like this. So now I'm adding some darker parts to the feathers, always at the end of the feathers, with the lighter part down near the skin, or where the feathers actually connect to the body of the dragon. Now if I'm painting feathers that are closer to the body and less fluffed up, like the feathers on its neck or on its cheek, or basically any of the feathers that are not cresting up over the head like I have along the top of the head and the neck, then the colours will be closer together, or sort of smoothed over. So here I don't want the feathers to be lifting up very much, so I've got the dark edge is very small. It's only got a very small amount of darkness to it before it meets in with the next row of feathers. And these areas where the feathers are much closer into the body, I use the smudge tool a lot more and blur the colours in much more, so you sort of end up with this sort of smoothed over look. And if you do look at references of birds, if you're looking, if ones that are not really close up, then you'll see that feathers that are close to the body aren't as defined, so you can't see each individual hair or individual feathers, and they do sort of lay flat on the body and just look like one uniform sort of smooth area. So basically the idea here is I'm only really detailing the feathers that are poking out or fluffing up, and the others are all painted as a smooth surface, so sort of mounds of feathers. So that's the kind of idea I go with here. So you kind of just gotta, I don't know, just sort of feel it out and decide where I want to have the feathers sticking up and where I want to lay them flat. It probably is a good idea to use reference if you have anything that's in a similar shape to the creature you're trying to draw. Then reference is really great, and I always encourage people to use reference. If you're not sure on how to do something, then look at real life. But when it comes to dragons, that's not always possible. But Yeah, so this is how I do my feathers. You can see I just keep adding in little lines of light that are coming from underneath little tufts of feathers, and I just blur that all back in again so that you end up with this really smooth look to the feathers. And the only parts that really end in like a harsh end are the actual ones that are sticking up and fluffing out of the creature itself. The others sort of smooth, lay flat with the body, so there's less of a sharp edge to them, and they're much more more smoothed in with the smudge tool. I'm just going to add a little bit of shine to this chest feathers, because feathers are shiny, but I don't like to overdo it because then it gets confused with the shading of the rest of the feathers. But essentially, yeah, this is pretty much it. There are sort of three sort of areas. You've got your individual long feathers, and then you're laying flat smaller close feathers, and the nose sort of has like an in between, so it's kind of like a mashup of the two different types of feathers. So I kind of have like I guess like a wave motion, the zigzag motion I described at the front. We've got sort of some of the feathers are poking up over top and laying on top of the feathers behind it, so you'd see the sort of zigzag or wave pattern in there. And just adding a tiny bit more light parts in between the feathers that are really fluffed up, because you'd be able to see between them more. So the ones that are really sticking up, I'm just lightening up a little bit in between some more as well. But this is pretty much it. You can add some detail in, of course, if you want to add some of those little lines that you can see on feathers. I generally only do that on the larger feathers, because I think they're too distracting otherwise, and it becomes too complicated, and it'll take you a long time to individually put feathers on, little lines on every single feather on this. So I don't do that. I only do it on the larger feathers that are sticking up, like the crest feathers here, just to sort of drive home that these are feathers. But I don't know, I think this looks more like feathers than fur, in my opinion. But yeah, this is just how I do feathers. You can of course do them anyway. I just thought I'd share with you the way in which I like to draw feathers. Now I'm going to add an extra shadow layer on the top of this, as I do find whenever I'm detailing with things like feathers or scales or fur, that sometimes it ends up looking a bit flat. And I've lost some of that three-dimensional look, so I just add an extra layer here and get a really fuzzy brush and add some more shadows to give it a bit more of a three-dimensional feel. Then I'm going to make some adjustments. I actually just decided I'll make the crest a different color, so I've duplicated it, put it on another layer, and we're going to make it pink. And then I just erase away the parts that shouldn't be pink, because I have duplicated the layer, so I'm free to do that. And that's pretty much it. That's my feathered dragon, using the base that I created for the scale dragon, and it's basically how I like to paint feathers using Artflow. Now we're going to use the same base to do the furred dragon, and originally I thought doing fur was going to be the toughest challenge for me, because I very, very rarely do fur. I've done feathers and scales more, especially scales. But it turns out for me, fur is really, really easy to do. So it's kind of similar to feathers, where I create these like little zigzags of color, except that they're much finer and closer together. And I basically just blur or smudge everything in together over and over again. So you see I've added little zigzags of dark and light. I've added some more pink in, because you can kind of see that like fur on a creature is a bit thinner than, well, a lot thinner than scales. So I've changed its nose to be like a little pink animal, like a deer nose or something. You can experiment with different brushes when using fur. I've used this sort of splodgy brush, makes very nice sort of fluffy, like if you wanted like a little, I don't know, kitten or something that had very sort of soft fluffy fur, then this brush would work well. And I just sort of, just shade with it fairly freely. Then if I want longer hair, I'll use one that's got a bit more sort of toothy feel to it. So I'm just using a normal paintery brush here and just going in a downwards motion, following the direction the hair would be in, starting with dark and then going to a lighter color and a lighter color again. There's lots of different brushes you can try, and I do recommend experimenting with quite a few of them. I had a lot of fun doing fur, and fur can be different lengths and sort of different textures depending on where, what kind of animal it is and where the hair is located. I did find like this smoky sort of veil brush kind of good for sort of longer hair that sort of matted a little bit together, I guess. I found that was quite effective. I didn't like the brushes that were very, like these comb brushes. I didn't find them very good. I think they were just too symmetrical, too unnatural. I liked the ones that sort of had, you know, random sort of patterns to where their strokes were going. Then to sort of emphasize individual hairs, I'll just get a single stroke brush like the bamboo brush, and I'll just put individual strokes here and there so you can kind of tell there's individual hairs still on this creature. And I just sort of add them in here and there, so you can see I've got some around the nostrils, around the eyes, and I'll lighten up certain areas that I want to be the focal point on. You don't need to overdo this. It's just giving the idea that this is a hairy animal. You don't have to draw every single hair, as that can be distracting and very time consuming to do that. Now I'm just being lazy here and just blurring in these what were originally scale spikes. I'm just painting over them a little bit and then using my smudge tool, which I have, as I mentioned at the start of the video, relied on very heavily for both this, for the fur and the feathers. But yeah, you shouldn't be afraid to use a smudge tool. I know in high school and stuff I was told not to smudge, but I love smudging. It's the best thing ever. So don't be afraid to try the tools that are here. They're here for you to use, not for you to think that it's cheating to use them or anything like that. So use the tools you have and experiment. It's fun. So yeah, that's pretty much it for hair. It was pretty quick to do. You can very quickly get a furry texture if you are using fuzzy brushes or brushes that already have a sort of hairy texture to them. I'm just using the color balance now to make some final adjustments to make it a slightly different sort of tone to my other two pictures. But yeah, this is my furry dragon, and that's how I use Artflow to make hairy dragons. Thanks everybody for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop me a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I always have a Patreon if you'd like to support me. Here are some of my videos that contain fur and feathers. Bye!